A poor girl married a beggar without knowing he was a millionaire, and what he did surprised everyone. The church was silent, except for the faint creaking of wooden pews as restless guests shifted in their seats. All eyes were fixed on the altar, not on the priest, not even on the bride, but on the man standing in front of her. His clothes were torn and faded, his boots worn out, his dreadlocked hair loose and carelessly tied, and his face bore the marks of time. He looked like a man who had slept on the streets for months, maybe even years. People in the audience whispered behind their hands. Some couldn't hide their disapproval. Others simply stared in shock. And yet the bride, a young woman in a flowing white lace dress, looked at him with calm determination. Her name was Lillian. She was known in her town for being kind but poor. Raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12, she worked at a local restaurant and lived in a rented room behind a laundromat. Life hadn't been easy, but Lillian always smiled and gave more than she asked for. The man standing in front of her was only known as Elias. No one knew where he came from. He'd first been seen sleeping behind the train station, asking for odd jobs at the market. His presence was mostly ignored, except by Lillian. 2 months ago, she had noticed him sitting in the cold outside the restaurant. She had just finished her shift and had a leftover sandwich in her bag. On instinct, she offered it to him. To her surprise, Elias didn't take it right away. "Are you sure?" he asked in a quiet, respectful voice. That night, they talked for hours. She shared her dreams of one day opening a small flower shop. He listened, really listened, as if every word she said mattered. In the weeks that followed, Elias kept showing up. Sometimes he helped carry boxes at the restaurant. Sometimes he swept the alley behind the building. Always quiet, always respectful. And every night, he and Lillian would talk. He never flirted, never asked for money, never crossed a line. And when he finally asked, "Would you marry someone like me?" she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, "because I've never met anyone who treated me the way you do." She thought he was a beggar, and still she said yes. That was what Elias had been looking for. He wasn't poor, not really. Elias F. had once been the son of a billionaire until he walked away after a bitter inheritance battle, a betrayal by a close friend, and the sudden death of his mother. Elias had given up his family's corporate empire, donated most of his wealth anonymously, and disappeared from the world. For 2 years, he traveled through cities and towns, living as a drifter, not because he had to, but because he wanted to find something money couldn't buy: true love, a woman who could see his heart without knowing his name or his wealth. And now he stood at the altar, facing Lillian, the only person who had looked at him and hadn't looked away. But she knew nothing of this. She thought she was marrying a man who had nothing. And when the priest asked them to join hands, Elias could see tears forming in Lillian's eyes, not out of fear, not out of doubt, but something deeper: love, courage. The guests remained seated, frozen. Some looked horrified. Distant cousins refused to even stand. Her former boss shook his head in disbelief, but Lillian never looked at them, only at Elias. And just as the priest opened the book to begin the vows, as the final "I do" slipped from Lillian's lips, a hush fell over the church. The priest gently closed his book. "By the power vested in me," he said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Some guests clapped hesitantly. Most remained seated, lips tight, eyes narrowed. They couldn't believe she had married a man who looked like he had come straight from the street. But Lillian didn't care. She turned to Elias with a trembling smile, and he looked at her like she was the first sunrise he'd seen in years. Then, something unexpected happened. Elias leaned in and whispered, "There's something I need to tell you." She blinked, confused. He nodded toward the chapel doors. "Come with me." With a puzzled look, still in her white dress and holding her bouquet, Lillian followed Elias out of the church. The moment the heavy doors opened, a sleek black car pulled up at the steps, a custom BMW with chrome wheels. A man in a suit stepped out and walked straight to Elias. "Mr. Ford," the man said with a bow, "your father's inheritance has been fully transferred to your name. Everything is ready." Lillian froze. "Mr. Ford." The man turned to her and smiled politely. "And you must be Mrs. Ford. Welcome." She looked at Elias. "I don't understand. Who was that? What inheritance?" Elias gently took her hand. "Lillian, I haven't been completely honest with you. My name is Elias Ford. I was born into one of the richest families in the country, but after my mother died, I left it all behind. I needed to know if someone could love me, not for my money, not for my name, just for me." Lillian held her breath. Her bouquet nearly slipped from her hands. "You're rich?" she whispered. "You're not poor." "I was poor by choice," he said softly, "to find you." She stepped back in shock. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought the whole street might hear it. You lied to me? I never lied, he said. I just didn't tell you everything. I had to be sure. He pulled a small envelope from his coat. Inside was the deed to the flower shop you always dreamed of, he whispered. She took the paper with trembling hands. Her name was already printed on it, full ownership. A small store downtown, bought and waiting. Her knees gave out, and she sat down on the church steps, tears falling freely. Now Elias knelt beside her. I know it's a lot, he said, but you taught me that true wealth isn't in what you own, but in who walks beside you. I was ready to marry you with nothing, but you gave me everything before I even told you the truth. Behind them, the crowd from the church began to exit. The same people who had judged him minutes before were now standing with their mouths open, staring at the luxury car, the suits, the formal entourage. The whispers turned from pity to awe, but Elias didn't care. He looked only at Lillian. She stared at him for a long moment, then finally let out a breath. You could have told me earlier, you know. I know, he said, but I didn't want to risk it until I was sure you were the one. She laughed through her tears, lightly hitting his arm. That's the dumbest and sweetest thing anyone's ever done. He smiled. Do you still want this? He raised his hand, not with wealth, not with power, just as a man. She took it. The moment she stood up, the crowd began to applaud. A real applause this time. Even her old boss gasped and stumbled for words. The distant cousins who had refused to smile now stepped forward wide-eyed, but she walked past all of them, hand in hand with the man she had chosen long before she knew what he had. That very night, Elias took her to the flower shop. Inside were fresh arrangements waiting, keys on the counter, and a sign that read, Lillian's Garden, where love grows. She cried again, not for the money, but because, for the first time in her life, someone had seen her worth, not for what she owned, not for who she knew, just for her. And as they stood under the warm lights of their new beginning, surrounded by flowers and hope, Lillian finally whispered, I would have loved you, even if you never had a dime. He replied, that's why you're my everything.